The de Havilland Canada DHC-7, more properly known as the Dash 7, is a turboprop with quite a lot of history behind it. She first flew back in 1975, and entered service later on in 1978. Her claim to fame was her quad array of large turboprop engines and fairly small fuselage, all blending together to create a light, nimble aircraft with STOL, short takeoff and landing, characteristics, which enabled it to skirt in and out of airfields with short runways. These important design aspects have been preserved with the newly released virtual rendition for Microsoft Flight Simulator from add-on maker Pilots. The team has brought the turboquad from the 70s into the modern sim with some nice detail, but much like any old machine, there are a few parts missing. Considering its age, it should come as no surprise that the avionics in this bird are fairly rudimentary. There is a handy quick start guide that's included in the install file when you buy it from the Pilot's website, but there's currently no interactive checklist functionality, and even the ultimate Shift plus E key combination yields no results. Nevertheless, it's a good thing that the Dash 7 suite is very straightforward, as getting its electrics running and the engines ignited took basically no time at all when I first tried it out. All you have to do is turn on the battery, flip on the fuel pumps, turn the starter knob for each engine on one at a time, and set the condition levers to feather. Repeat that 3 more times and the quad comes to life gradually. Flying this old bird is also not a challenge at all. She includes a run-of-the-mill autopilot system that allows it to follow a heading or a nav signal, and one can also set a predetermined altitude for the aircraft to ascend or descend to. This is accompanied by a vertical speed knob and also a yaw damper. While these features are all great, the actual flight characteristics do take a little bit of getting used to. At first glance, the look of the 4 big engines on a fairly small airframe seems like it should almost be overkill, but it turns out that the Dash and Dash 7 is as misleading as its visual identity. In the real world, its maximum cruise speed is only about 266 miles per hour or 428 kilometers per hour. When flying it in the sim, with not even a full load and at fairly low altitudes, which was around 7,000 to 11,000 feet, I could only get the prop to go just under 200 knots, or about 230 miles an hour, or 370 kilometers per hour, at a climb rate of just 500 feet per minute, which is what you'd expect to get out of a general aviation aircraft rather than an airliner. I've observed the Dash 7's airspeed to hover around about 170 knots. In square terms then, this thing really isn't about speed. As it would turn out, her less than stellar performance here in Microsoft Flight Simulator is basically a match for the real-world aircraft. After doing a little bit of research, I discovered that the Dash 7 was designed to actually compete outside of the realm of other turboprops of its time. Examples include popular airframes like the Fokker F-27 and Convair 600. Those turboprops were larger and had more powerful engines. The mission for the Dash 7, rather, was to go where those aircraft couldn't. She was built to be more rugged and utilitarian, able to slip in and out of airfields with short runways and overall simple infrastructure. Seeing that she served such a small niche, it should come as no surprise that the production run didn't last very long. The Dash 7 was produced for only 13 years, with the last model rolling off the assembly line in 1988. A mere 113 of the type were built within that time. For comparison's sake, 586 units of the aforementioned Fokker F-27 were built, and an even more impressive 1,086 units were built for the Convair 600. Despite its short run, however, the Dash 7 did manage to see deployments in a variety of regions. While various airlines flew it in the rough winter regions it was designed for, the turboprop did happen to see a brief stint in the Caribbean with airliners like Gulfstream International Airlines and Paradise Island Airlines, both of which are now defunct. Nevertheless, their history with this aircraft is a bit interesting. Only because I happened to spot a comment underneath the announcement post from Pilots on Facebook did I learn that the Dash 7 used to roam the skies of my own home country, the Bahamas. Both of the 2 aforementioned airlines commenced operations in the 80s, and they each flew the Dash 7 for a few years. Gulfstream International Airlines served various islands of the Bahamas and many cities in Florida, which was fitting considering it was based out of Miami. As for Paradise Island Airlines, it operated based out of the now extinct Paradise Island Airport, which is, of course, located on Paradise Island in the Bahamas. This island is far better known today as the home to the world-famous Atlantis Resort. Paradise Island Airlines ran Dash 7 flights from that airport on Paradise Island to various spots in Florida, including Miami, Fort Lauderdale, Orlando, and West Palm Beach. Seeing that I discovered this little nugget of history just before acquiring the Dash 7, I decided to jump into the experience by making use of the included Pan Am livery and flying between the Bahamas and Florida in order to recreate some of the historical routes in the sim. The choice of the Pan Am livery seemed fitting because I didn't have a livery for those other airlines, but this one also doesn't exist anymore and also did used to run flights to the Bahamas. Even though it's been nice to take this old bird out for some historical island hopping, I couldn't help but notice the flaws of this initial release version. Slow speeds aside, the overall quality of the Dash 7 as an add-on is a bit of a mixed bag. As I alluded to at the onset of this review, there are still some bits and bobs missing from the package. For one, the texture work isn't really half bad, but one particular area that I don't like is that there's a thick black area across the top of the wings that are meant to represent consistent exposure to engine exhaust. While the exceptionally dark look of it on the model makes sense given that it's supposed to represent an aged aircraft, the texture just looks odd and muddy to me. The actual designs of all the included liveries are just fine, but moving on into the interior, again there are a few oddities. I just mentioned how the engine exhaust is seemingly meant to represent an older aircraft, but when you look around the interior, the texture work would make you believe that the plane just underwent a heavy renovation. The cabin and cockpit are almost too clean, aside from the windows having some blurry scratches to represent faux wear and tear. Considering the ruggedness of the airframe and its actual age, some more granular detail would have been nice. Microsoft Flight Simulator has prided itself over the years for offering gorgeous, practically photorealistic visuals, so anytime there's less than stellar texture work on a model, it tends to stick out. That's definitely the case here, unfortunately. But, of course, visuals are only half the package, and the least important half at that. As for the actual flying experience in the sim, as mentioned before, the Dash 7 controls just fine. She's a very forgiving aircraft and easy to handle. Her signature STOL capabilities are preserved here in the sim very well, as she can get onto and off of a runway without a hiccup, throw back the reverse thrust when landing, and the airspeed will almost fade immediately. It also helps that the comically low landing speed makes it feel almost like you're piloting a larger Cessna 172. Though really, this is more often compared to flying a larger Twin Otter, which is essentially the little sister to the Dash 7. Highlights aside, however, there are various bugs present in the release version of the add-on. This isn't a bug, but it is unfortunately a common oversight. Not all the buttons and switches are operational. But what is indeed a bug, and perhaps the most egregious one so far, is that the co-pilot sitting next to you, their model is flashing bright purple. This particular issue is a common one in Microsoft Flight Simulator, but it only appears when textures applied to a model are incompatible with the sim version. Thus, it seems Pilots is just using outdated and/or broken texture files. That said, it is weird that the co-pilot model is visible in the cockpit to begin with. What's perhaps my biggest pet peeve with this aircraft, however, is how it taxis. While it functions just fine in the air, and considering that it isn't very fast when it is up there, I'd love to know why it seems so eager to get off the ground in the first place. Once the engines are running, simply unlocking the parking brake will have the aircraft immediately begin to pick up speed without any movement of the throttles. Thus, you instead have to carefully manage the condition levers to try and mitigate this effect, perhaps even using the reverse thrusters at times to further help. While these characteristics are not totally strange for a turboprop, they seem to be severely exaggerated here. Taxiing with just two engines running does help a bit, though it's still a little bit more complicated than it should be. Also, I have to mention that there's no EFB in this aircraft currently. While this isn't really a requirement by any means, seeing that so many other add-on aircraft make use of it for flight planning and ground operations, it really would have been nice to see one included here as well. In fact, currently the only way to fuel up and load cargo is by means of the sim's own aircraft weight option menu. Pilot's Dash 7 is certainly not a perfect release given all the flaws that I've highlighted here, but there is hope on the horizon. The team has already confirmed that it's working to fix bugs found in this release version, which should hopefully release within the next few days. As of the time of publication, however, exact news on when that's going to be has not yet been made available. Nevertheless, despite these flaws, there is still some fun to be had here with this rugged little flyer. Much like Asobo's ATR 42/72, the Dash 7 offers a nice alternative for running airline operations in the sim that doesn't doesn't involve flying yet another Airbus jet. Seeing that such turboprops like this are slower and less capable by nature, it ends up being a more hands-on experience. And seeing that you're flying lower, you get to admire the aerial views with a little bit more detail. And considering that the Dash 7 in particular is made to get in and out of small airports, you can certainly take it to a wider variety of spots compared to a typical passenger jet. In the real world, the Dash 7 still flies today in various sectors, including continuing to serve as a commercial aircraft. Thus, it is nice to have this unique historical bird now available in Microsoft Flight Simulator. If this also happens to pave the way for its more modern sister, the Dash 8, that'll be even better. After all, we could definitely use a few more turboprops in this sim because, again, we're tired of all the Airbus airliners. All things considered, with some oil, grease, and a little bit of love, this little turboprop has the makings to become a wonderful addition to any virtual pilot's hangar who's looking for a slightly more gritty airline flying experience in Microsoft Flight Simulator. Here's hoping the pilot's studio makes quick work of its promise, and sure enough, the MSRP of €25 will be just a little bit easier to justify. Thank you for watching this review here on Extreme Azure. You can check out more content from me, A.K Rahming, over on gamescout.co.uk, and also see what the rest of the team has cooking up for you. In the meantime, make sure you leave a like and a comment down below, and tell me what you think about the Dash 7, and what are your favorite add-ons for Microsoft Flight Simulator. And of course, if you want to stay tuned for the future episodes, make sure you go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Until next time, it's been me, AK, and I'll see you later.